Welcome to NCFCA Summit 2019. I'm Amy Joy Tofty, NCFCA Director of Education, and we are recording live from the University of Northwestern in St. Paul, Minnesota. NCFCA is passionate about equipping students with the necessary skills to engage culture and communicate truth. Thank you for joining us for building a firm foundation for speech. Speech invites students to share a message with their audience. During this panel discussion, we'll lay a firm foundation by reviewing the basics and discussing practical tips and tools for the season. Throughout the session, our viewing audience, you're welcome to ask questions by clicking on the button at the bottom of your screen. We'll answer those questions during our live question and answer session. And if you need technical support, please email summittech@ncfca.org. Stay tuned for our fantastic giveaways, which include a Speech Games and Icebreakers ebook from our friends at Lasting Impact, as well as an NCFCA complete speech curriculum set. So joining me today are NCFCA Marketing Director and your production manager for the summit, Mrs. Natalia Rosa, NCFCA Speech Committee Chair, Lori Kraut, and NCFCA Speech Committee member and National Compliance Director, Sharon Mansell. So welcome, ladies, as you're coming on screen. We're so glad you're here.
Hello. It's wonderful to be here.
We're going to wait just a moment for our other two guests to arrive. Good morning, Sharon.
Good morning.
How are you today?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Sharon, where are you calling in from?
I'm calling in from South Carolina, down on the East Coast near Hilton Head Island.
Very good. Well, it's good to have you. And Natalia, you're right next door.
I am. I'm in the classroom next to Amy Joy on the University of Northwestern's beautiful campus.
Yes. So we are so excited to be here with all of you. And we are going to get started here in just a second. So thank you as we work through our technical difficulties.
It looks like we have people joining us from all across the country. I see Washington, Maryland, Pennsylvania, Hawaii, Alabama.
Let's stream live from Hawaii next year. I think that would be great.
Sounds like a plan.
Yes. All right, Natalia, I'm going to let you keep working on our friend, and we'll go ahead and get started.
Okay.
So let's start with a little bit of vision behind why we offer speech events in the NCFCA. So Sharon, can you think of a speech that either somebody has given that has really impacted you or that your children have given that has really impacted you?
Yes, actually, over the years, we've been in the league for this will be our 12th year, and so there's several speeches have impacted me. A couple that stand out are, one was a humorous given by Timothy Warren. Anytime somebody can take a humorous speech or a topic and cause me to laugh, I enjoy that. I think most of us do when we can laugh and have fun. And so one he did long ago, and it was just on the topic of going to the dentist, and he took that and brought that literature to life in such a way that you felt like you were there. And so that was one that impacted me. And then I've had several over the course where, and even my own children who have had situations where they've put them into a speech by writing it themselves and have been able to walk through scenarios that have happened to them in life. And it's been really inspiring to see when God takes and is molding a student and they're able to put that into words and then present that in a form for the audience.
I love that. Thank you so much. And Natalia, you actually were a competitor, so you are one of our alumni. So tell me about competing in speech. How did that affect your life?
Yes, I was a competitor. So I started at age 14, and Speech Innovate was never an activity that I would have envisioned myself participating in. So I was not the student who was the first to raise their hand in the classroom or to get up and give a speech or to participate in drama. But my parents told me one day, Natalia, we've signed you up for Speech Innovate, and you will be going to the first club session next week. And it's going to be great. You are going to participate in an event called Impromptu Speaking, where you have 2 minutes to prepare a 5-minute speech. And I thought, what is this? I am not the right person to do Speech Innovate. I remember distinctly thinking about this one moment when my dad had asked me to make a call on his phone. And so I dialed the number, and I accidentally called his boss's number instead of the intended number. And as soon as I heard the voice on the other line, I just froze and hung up. And so when I heard that I was going to do impromptu, that was my thought. If I can't handle speaking with a stranger or an unexpected circumstance, how am I going to give a 5-minute speech? But looking back, Speech Innovate and participation in NCFCA really did transform my perspective of communication. And if I had to pick just one speech that was my favorite that I presented, and I competed in nearly all of them except for the humorous ones, because that's not my strong point. My favorite was a persuasive that I gave in my second year of competition. And it's my favorite because I think it was the first time that I really realized that even as a 15-year-old student, I had an opportunity to communicate a message of meaning and of impact. And so it was on the topic of the foster care system in America. And I wrote the speech because of a personal experience that gave me a glimpse into that system, and ended up having an opportunity to share the speech outside of competition, saw some real life impact that was made in some children even being adopted as a result of that speech that was given. And so to realize that at 15, you can write and present a speech that does communicate truth, and it does transform or touch the hearts of your listener, that was an incredible experience. And I continue to see just the blessing of that time from age 15 to 18 continue on into my life today.
That's great. So any other favorites there, Lori, that you've heard?
Well, I was actually going to talk about a persuasive speech as well, but I'd really like to piggyback on what Natalia said, and that is exactly why we do speech in NCFCA, is because we see the opportunity for growth, not even in the audience. You're given this wonderful platform of people to present your message to, but in the competitor themselves and in the whole affiliate family. I think there's tremendous ability if we allow the Holy Spirit to work in our lives to just really grow throughout the whole process.
Absolutely. And in some ways, they're taking that speech from its earliest stages, probably in September of the year prior, and then they're giving that speech all the way through sometimes June. So it's an opportunity for them to think on ideas and refine those ideas. And I think it's a fantastic opportunity for our students. So let's go into the opportunities that are available in NCFCA. What are some of the different types of speech events that NCFCA offers?
Broadly, we have 3 events.
Right?
Yes. Go ahead, Lori.
I'll go broad and you guys can go narrow. We offer platform speeches, interpretation, and limited prep speeches. So the platform speeches are the ones that are prepared beforehand, memorized. The interpretation speeches deal with taking a piece of literature and cutting it, analyzing it to make a meaningful presentation. And then the limited prep speeches, of course, as the name implies, you have a very limited time of preparation to prepare a meaningful speech.
I call them platforms in a hurry. So a lot of the same skills there that we learn in platforms are then applied in impromptu. The difference is you don't have time to prepare it ahead of time, or you have a very limited amount of time. So let's think about platforms. Let's narrow in there and just talk about either famous platform speeches or real life examples when a person might give a platform speech.
Sure, I'll jump in.
Oh, go ahead, Natalia.
We'll both in. Yeah, I was just going to start with examples. So some top speeches I know people might think of that have changed the world would begin with I Have a Dream, right, by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And so that would be an example of a platform speech that is remembered through the years and also had a tremendous impact in history. So Sharon, I don't know if you want to jump in.
I think that, again, I was saying there have been a number of speeches that have been impactful. And each year, each tournament, there's usually one within the platform category that does reach. And I just reach each person, I should say. Mm-hmm. When we look at the real world, when you're thinking of anytime something's presented, we can think of it as a platform speech. And it's really the one category that you think of often. Anytime anyone hears the word speech, it's the platforms that come to mind. Right. So, but when we think of those, the students do a great job in the setting within NCFCA of taking those and perfecting them to, like Lori brought up earlier, and Natalia, to allow that to impact each person specifically. And so, sorry, I have kids. And so to impact you, each tournament, you are impacted by a different speech because of how our NCFCA students take these skills and bring them to the next level.
So that's a great segue. What are some of the skills that our students develop in writing and delivering platform speeches?
I'll jump in with some personal experience. So I can tell you some of the times when I have definitely used the skills that I practiced in competition have been in college. So responding to essay prompts, giving presentations as a part of a classroom experience. So I think there's a tremendous academic benefit with that skill of learning to think very quickly on your feet, learning how to synthesize different ideas around one cohesive theme, and then also learning to evaluate and understand and connect with your audience. So even taking into consideration a variety of age ranges, which is one thing that I love with the community judges that we have in competition. You could be speaking to another competitor's grandmother or grandfather. You could be speaking to a business owner from the community. You might be speaking to someone who's involved in local politics. And you could be speaking to other parents or even past NCFCA graduates. So that experience of just communicating and receiving feedback from a variety of audience members continues on academically, and then I think also in the workplace as well, and learning how to engage with, once again, those variety of different ages and backgrounds, and being able to articulate your perspective and to kind of tell your story of maybe in a company setting where you see a project going. Those are all skills that are acquired in platform speaking and interpretation and in limited prep.
That's great. Any other thoughts about skills that our competitors learn?
I can speak just recently. We've had two different occasions where our children went on mission trips and had to present before the church. And then we were simply at a wedding, and I kept getting comments from people how my children stood out because they would look people in the eye and talk to them. And those are just a couple quick skills that are very practical that have impacted our family, and where it's a noticeable difference because I always get comments from that, and we aren't really doing anything special. What we do is practice those skills through the NCFCA.
That's right. That's great. So we have a mission at NCFCA that we are trying to train a generation to think critically and to communicate effectively in order to address life issues from a biblical worldview in a manner that glorifies God. So with that said, how do you see platform speeches fulfilling the mission of NCFCA?
I'll take this one. I love the fact that speech is such a great tool for this. I love the mission of NCFCA, and specifically with platform speeches, the fact that you prepare that speech and with intentionality, and just hopefully you're really thinking about the message that you want to convey throughout the entire tournament season. But those words are not just going to be on the ears of your audience, but they're going to be on your own ears. And the character development that takes place, definitely, I see this meeting the mission of NCFCA as far as training competitors to address life issues, and definitely bringing glory to God in the whole process of the preparation and the delivery of that speech.
That's great. Other thoughts on that? Have you heard any speeches that really do address life issues, things that your audience members might be going through?
That's what I was going to chime in with, that I know personally, that was what I loved about writing speeches too, was learning this perspective that when you communicate, you're not coming up with ideas in a vacuum, right? So it's all being fueled by whatever you feed your heart and your mind with. And so part of writing a speech is really learning the art of self-reflection and processing, what is the Lord teaching me right now? What am I struggling with? When I look back on the past year, where are some areas where I could really continue to grow? Where are some areas where maybe my choices weren't in alignment with a biblical worldview? And so why is that? And then as I process through and allow the Lord to work in my life, how can I then share a nugget of what I've learned, even at the age of 15, 16, 17, 18, with the audience that's in front of me? And that's a skill that will continue for the rest of your life, that you are processing and filtering things through the worldview that you have. And then really being just sensitive and mindful of how God would use the experiences in your life to bless and make an impact on the lives of others.
That's great.
Yes, and I would say, Amy Joy, something that has always been powerful as we've gone around, and now when we have several friends across the nation, thanks to NCFCA, but when I talk to the other moms, it's amazing how the students begin and families begin to pray about what message it is that they would share this next year. So it's not just something that happens quickly often. It's prayed for, it's thought through, and you think about the number of times that a student goes to a tournament. They have 3 judges sitting in front of them for 10 minutes, and they have a captive audience. And so just taking that and looking at the impact, again, of who God brings in front of them for that message, it has been amazing over the years. I know you all can share the same thing, that you've heard time and time again when people come out of a speech room, how much they've been impacted. But that's all been planned ahead of time. And it's wonderful to see how the Lord works in that process.
Absolutely. I love that, Sharon. Thank you. So let's move on to limited preparation speeches. These are speeches which are prepared within a limited time frame and then presented by the speaker. So think about real life. When do we have to give speeches without very much time to prepare?
Right now?
Yes, indeed. Indeed.
Everyday conversations, too.
Yeah.
Yes.
Say that again, Lori.
I said everyday conversations that you have with people, and learning to have your conversations with intentionality. I know that's not always possible, but if it's something that you've practiced and it's on your mind, you're far more apt to make a conversation directed towards purpose. And I mean, we live in a lost world, and we do have opportunities, especially to share with people that don't know Jesus. And if we have practiced and honed that skill, we're going to be more effective ambassadors for Christ.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah, and I'll
Good.
give some more practical examples. I know in college at one point I had an opportunity to participate in an essay competition, and the final level of that competition was to present as a part of a panel. And so we had researched and really written about these subjects in depth, but we didn't know the particular questions that would be asked. And there, again, was such a variety in the audience in front of us. So you didn't really know from what biblical worldview or what background or what life experience these questions would be asked. But the art of preparing a speech and going through that same process, preparing for limited prep, because it requires a great deal of preparation. It's not just that you throw yourself up on stage without any preparation whatsoever. You have to take time to really think about the stories that have changed your life, the people who have made a difference in your life, the books you're reading, the movies you're watching, and the lessons that you can learn. If you go through that process and practice in limited preparation and competition, then I think you have such a skill set for all of life, whether it's on a panel, whether it's in an interview, whether it's just talking with the person next to you when you're waiting in line. God will always present those opportunities when you are prepared to offer a response with winsomeness and with respect.
Yeah, I have a.
And we are going to go into more. Go ahead, Sharon.
Oh, I was going to say our son had the opportunity to put his impromptu skills to work. He worked with a congressman, and we were hit by a hurricane in our area. And when that happened, he was down actually on Hilton Head Island, and they were getting ready for a FEMA meeting. Well, so many people showed up that the congressman looked at him and said, "You're going to need to lead this in another room. We're going to split the group." So here was our son, who never led a FEMA meeting, but because of his skills in the NCFCA, because of doing impromptu, that was fine. He was able to take that skill set and move that to this very real setting where people were impacted, when you had a lot of emotion in a room, and it just served him so well.
That's great. So we've talked about that platforms and limited prep are similar in that they are speeches that the students come up with themselves. Why are they different? What skills in particular can you learn through doing a limited preparation speech?
Thinking quickly on your feet.
Yes. I think about all the different places in life where that applies. So whether you end up going into computer science, or whether you're in management, or whether you're in business, all of those fields are going to have opportunities and times where you have to be able to think quickly and articulate your thoughts clearly. And then Sharon, you brought up this idea too of telling a story and bringing in other things that you've learned to that, so that it is conversational and you can engage your audience. So thinking about that, how do these limited preparation speeches meet our mission?
Can you repeat that? I'm sorry that I didn't hear that.
Sure. How do limited preparation speeches meet the mission of NCFCA? If we're trying to train students who can address life issues from a manner that in a biblical worldview, in a manner that glorifies God, how does a limited preparation speech fulfill that mission?
Well, as we mentioned before, I think the whole way of when we are practicing these skills, we learn to address everything through a biblical worldview. As we walk this out in the NCFCA, it naturally transitions to real world settings. And the limited preps, because of we have the apologetics in there, extemporaneous, and impromptu. These skills, taking them and practicing them tournament after tournament at home in the club setting, you're naturally learning with coaching and again with practice to approach them in a way that glorifies God. And the students learn where they're struggling and are able to fix that. And then it helps, again, ultimately the defense of the Christian faith, where we are doing that in the day-to-day setting and doing that. That's always most often impromptu.
Yep, that's great. And can you see any connection between the limited preparation speeches and then competing in debate?
Definitely. There are a lot of, the debaters are constantly doing limited preparation speeches. They have a very small amount of time to construct their next argument, their next speech, while they're sitting at the table and also listening. So much multitasking going on there. It amazes me.
Yep, absolutely. Well, let's move to the other side of our speech category, the interpretation speeches. And Laura, you mentioned that those are taking a selection of literature and cutting it. Just for our new families, what does that mean, to cut a piece of literature?
Okay, most of the time when we read a piece of literature, it may be 300 or 400 pages. And obviously, there's no way that you can bring all of that into a 10-minute speech. So, of course, our rules explain really clearly how you go about the process of selecting the portions to make a meaningful speech. Once again, just with the other two, I would encourage starting with the message that you're wanting to get across. It will help in selecting the dialogue out of your literature that will then ultimately become the speech that is presented. Does that make sense?
And why? Absolutely. No, that's fantastic. Why do you think there's value in presenting stories and literature? So I will be honest with you, I'm a left brain thinker. I like my persuasives and I love debate. Help me to understand why there's value in our students branching out into interpretation speeches.
Not everyone's left brain like you, Amy. There are people that are just going to grasp the message better when they hear it told in a story. And there are competitors who are going to learn the life lessons more by doing the interpretation event versus sitting down and writing their speech as like with a platform.
That's right.
Yes,
that's
I
right.
agree with that.
Go ahead, Sharon.
I was going to say, when we're looking at these interpretations, when we look at students, like I have 10 children. Each of my children each child is very different. And when you take a lot of the children who are more creative and you put them in an interp setting, they can take that interp and do what someone else does with an informative in the message that they bring forth. And so it's that each child is different. I love to say about speech is that there's a place for everyone. It doesn't matter if you have a more introverted child, a more creative child, a more serious child. Because of the 3 categories and the events that we have available through NCFCA, each child can find their place within speech. And interpretation is just a very fun way to do that.
Mm-hmm. And I would jump in to say, too, there's this perspective that stories are powerful. And so you look at Jesus teaching through parables in the Bible. He was a masterful storyteller. And I think God also works in our own lives through story. So oftentimes we'll look back and reflect, and maybe in the moment and the experience, we didn't realize the lessons that we were learning. But when we look back on that in story form, we see a picture of what we were learning in those situations. So I would encourage students to think outside of the box, even if you would consider yourself more introverted or maybe more reserved. I know that's where I found myself. And interpretation actually ended up being one of my favorite categories because it taught me how to look for the message in story. That process of even cutting down a larger selection of literature and really asking the question, what are these characters wrestling with? What are they learning? Sometimes that's the very best way for God to work in our hearts and the hearts of others is to look at somebody else's story in life and then realize there are connection points where we can relate to the struggle that they're working through. So interpretation offers a wonderful opportunity for students to learn that.
I think back to an opportunity that I had to kind of learn the value of stories. My son decided to do a duo, and it was on a very, very simplistic children's book that happened to be one of our family favorites. And so he brought it to me and he said, hey, we'd really like to do this as a piece of literature. And I thought, I'm just not sure if there's enough here to like really qualify as literature. And so he and his partner decided they were going to do this speech. And at one of the tournaments, I was serving as the compliance director, and there was a woman waiting for me. And she said, are you the mother of said nameless child? And I said, yes. And in my mind, I'm thinking, oh no, what has my child done? And she just broke down in tears. And she said, I cannot tell you how much that speech spoke to my heart. And I realized in that moment what you were saying, Natalia, stories have a way of communicating truth in a way that penetrates past some of our intellectual knowledge, any of those barriers, and it really cuts through and gets down to our hearts. So I think about the skills that students learn through interp. So talk to the debater who says, oh no, I could never do an interp speech.
I've coached a few of those, and so I can give some of the practical benefits, which include, if you tend to be someone who says, oh no, I can never give an interp speech, you may struggle with empathizing a little bit more with your audience and incorporating story in your presentation, right? You may also struggle with getting outside of your own box, even using hand gestures and using facial expressions. And so interpretation does a wonderful job of breaking those barriers, because you have to get outside of your comfort zone. You're going to be taking the place of all these different characters and portraying them in a realistic way to the audience. So that might mean that you make some funny faces. It might mean that you're being extraordinarily expressive with your hand gestures and your movements. And so obviously debate's not going to reflect that completely, but I think going through that process of stretching yourself to practice those skills, perhaps in a little bit more of an extreme, then will translate into becoming a much more compelling speaker and debater in the round.
Great. Any other thoughts on that? I think it does help as well for our debaters who are intense and they're trying to squeeze in as many arguments as they can into any given debate round, just to remember that the person sitting in front of you is a person, and that they have a soul and they have a mind and a heart, and you have the opportunity to communicate truth. And one of the things I think that interps help debaters with is just to be more relatable and more personal in that approach to your audience. So, Lori, let's move into application. So we've talked about the what. We have these 3 different speech categories and lots of different speech opportunities underneath those. But how do you start walking this out at home? What tips and tricks would you recommend to competitors?
Well, I'll tell you something that I'm going to recommend to my club at home this summer. We're getting ready to have a speech camp, and as people are thinking about what they want to write their speeches about, I'm going to encourage them, before they even think about the topic, to first think about the message. And we've been talking about this throughout this entire time, how important the message is, and then as practically to write a speech, a very short speech about their speech, why they're choosing that message, and possibly to add to that through a journaling process throughout the year, but definitely at the end of the season to take a look at what they wrote, what God was teaching them at the time, the message that they were trying to convey, and how God has used that entire process throughout the competitive season. And I think it's always nice when we can see what's going on in our lives spiritually, what the Lord is doing. And I think it also takes the focus off of us and helps it to put the focus on Him and to really give the glory to Him, which is another part of our mission that we're really wanting to accomplish.
I so agree with you. I think sometimes we get so busy into the writing of speeches that we end up halfway through the semester and maybe we don't even enjoy that speech anymore. And so that idea of starting from the very beginning of what is it that you want to share with people? Natalia, you talked about what are the life lessons that God is teaching you, and how can you share that information with others? Any other tips and tricks that you would give to competitors?
I have one very practical tip that competitors and can start applying today, this week, and coaches can encourage their students to apply. And that tip, it's highlighted in the Comprehensive Guide to Speech that NCFCA has published, but you can begin implementing it on your own. This is something that worked very well for me, and it's to start compiling some kind of story notebook. And so this could take place on the notes in your phone. It could take place in a journal, kind of like Lori was mentioning, or it could just be a simple notebook. And for those of you who don't enjoy that as much, just note this doesn't have to be writing essays, right? You don't have to pour out thousands of words each day, but just writing down simple personal stories and the lessons that you're learning. Also writing down as you read, as you go through this academic year, right? Because you're going to be studying other subjects, you're going to be learning math and science. And as you're learning these things, what are the life skills and the applications that can be pulled out of that? Jot those down in notes, because I think if you can learn to approach life as a curator, almost as if you're going through and looking for those beautiful art pieces that you would put in a museum, right? Those beautiful stories that are impacting you and shaping the way you live. The more that you document those and you really begin to practice telling those stories, maybe in an impromptu speech, maybe in, who knows, a debate round, maybe in conversation with your neighbor, that is really, I think, the heart of excellent communication, is to first take that time for self-reflection and then to be able to communicate it at the right time and in the right place.
Natalia, when you were speaking of that, it reminded me, just in our family, so many times what you're talking about right there helps us to look at life with a little bit more of a positive perspective. So sometimes when really terrible things happen or something explodes or whatever the case might be, we will turn to each other and go, well, that'll show up in the next impromptu speech. So just this idea that life is composed of stories, and some are funny and some are sad and some are really difficult, and you have to learn to walk through those. But it gives us this opportunity to process through those and to be able to share those. Sharon, you are a mom of a lot of kids, and you have also served as a coach. So how would you recommend that parents and coaches encourage their speech students early in the season? So right now as they're getting started.
Yes, actually, I'm dealing with this with my own children right now. We just came back from speech camp. I think anytime you do that, you're inspired early on, and that is good. But one of the things that we like to do is take first, again, I mentioned earlier about praying, and I can't overemphasize that. Praying about the message begins early, and then taking ideas and putting them down on paper, because often we have ideas and we think of them in the car or we're talking about them, and then when we get home a week later, we're going, what was that idea, or what was that thought I had? So taking that and those thoughts and ideas and just having whoever does write in your family maybe record those, and then read. I would suggest doing a lot of reading over the summer, books you enjoy, looking up. I know when we're thinking through interps, we're always thinking through characters and books with a message. And so we try to take on reading certain books throughout the summer. And again, that's early preparation. And then take those ideas and begin to formulate an outline of the message. What is the goal? What is the message that is being shared? Or as Natalia's talked about, the story. What is it that you're trying to bring forth, to bring to life for this informative, even a persuasive? We still have something, a goal, a message that we're working on. And all of that can begin now, especially with that outline process.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Talk to the parent who has a student that wants to write a certain speech or use a certain piece of literature, and mom's thinking, oh, I'm not so sure about that one. How do you coach your own children in choosing material that is going to be a great opportunity for them to meditate on for the whole year.
Is this to me, Amy Joy?
Or Lori?
Lori?
Well,
Lori?
I would, yes, I would say that it's important. Once again, I feel like I just keep repeating myself, but you can question your child about what the message is here, and see if they can't come to that themselves. The knowledge that there's really not a redemptive message in this literature. It's not something that I want to spend, a whole competitive season working on. I mean, God gives us the children that we have, and he puts us in the places as their parents. And I do encourage parents to make sure that they are being hands-on and watching. And it's sad when someone prepares a speech and they get halfway through the competitive season and it's not appropriate. So it's good to be thinking about those things now and encouraging. We have a lot of new affiliate families, which is fantastic, and you may not even have that on your radar that that's something that you need to be aware of. But I would encourage parents to definitely just be watching, what your kids are doing with their speeches. Encourage them and encourage them to find the message that God has for them to share.
That's great. Any other thoughts you'd like to add there, Sharon?
I do. I think when we're just as parents, know if you have this gut instinct or you feel convicted about something that your child mentions or a piece that they want to do, go ahead and investigate that. There is a speech committee. You can email with questions about speeches, but I'd go to your coach, your local club, and ask those questions, because there is help. And that's one thing we as an organization really like mentorships. So we want the club level to be mentoring you, and as a new family, if you don't know. And so if you think of the fact that there are younger students often in these rooms, these speech rooms, there's children, little guys, 5 years old, 7 years old. And if this is a message that's being given, you want to make sure it's appropriate for all audiences. And that's one way to think through the topic. The other thing to consider is that this speech, it's not something that's memorized, given once, and then it's not touched again. This is a speech that hopefully they continue to refine throughout the season. So when you think of a speech, it's not written once, delivered once for 10 minutes, and then never touched again. Typically, if you're doing more than one tournament, you're going to be spending a lot of time on that. As everybody else has alluded to, there's just a lot of time. And what do we want our students meditating on and thinking about and memorizing? We think about hiding God's word in our heart. Well, the literature we use is also put in, and we want to be careful what it is that our students are thinking about and processing through and refining.
And Natalia, I'm curious, if I were to ask you right now, would you be able to remember some of your speeches?
Oh, yeah. Oh, to actually present them from memory?
Or at least the ideas that you spend a lot of time meditating on.
Yes, I could tell you the ideas. I wouldn't have the precise sentences memorized, but I could give you an impromptu version. How's that?
There you go. That's right.
Yeah, I was just going to offer an encouragement, because I know we have a lot of students on this call live with us, but especially for students who are experienced, I just want to encourage you to remember you have tremendous influence and impact as a student with those who are maybe younger than you, but maybe they're not. Maybe they're older, they're your peers, and they're just beginning with speech. So I just want to encourage you to remember that you're not just writing the speech for yourself. It's not just for a competitive activity, right? Competition is a huge part of what we're doing. But when you present these speeches, when you choose your topic, you are setting an example for the people around you. And I know that when I first started Speech Innovate, I looked up to those older students and those experienced students and was watching, how can I emulate what they're doing and what they're doing well? And so I think that's a reminder that does provide a little bit of this burden in a good way, kind of like James talks about, where there's power of life and death in the tongue, and that if you're going to speak, there's a responsibility that you have before the Lord to evaluate the message you're communicating, because you will be held responsible for that. And then I think there's also a very empowering message there as well, that you should not look down on yourself because you are young, because you are in high school. And God is going to use you in tremendous ways if you will remain sensitive to what he would have you say and to who he is going to have you encourage. So I think that's such an exciting place to be as you're preparing your speech.
Well, thank you so much. We're going to take a brief break here to do some fantastic giveaways. Thank you to our sponsors who have so graciously donated these. So first we have a Speech, Games, and Icebreakers ebook from our friends at Lasting Impact. And the winner of that resource is S. Young at Shelley Young 34. So congratulations, Shelley. And next we have a complete set of the NCFCA Comprehensive Guide to Speech, which includes a competitor's handbook, a coach's manual, and a parent's guide, and was edited. And we are grateful largely in part to Mrs. Natalia Rosa for her efforts in that project. So the winner of the speech curriculum is Angela Miller at Rich Ange. So if you have won a prize, please email summittech@ncfca.org and we will get those sent to you. So for this last portion of our session, we're going to open it up to our live question and answers, and you can go ahead and continue to type in questions. You'll click on the button at the bottom of your screen that says Ask a Question. So let's start out with this one. What kind of platform speeches are there?
Oh, great question. I don't think we really got into that. We have 3 types of platform speeches: informative, persuasive, and a brand new digital presentation category. So the informative informs, just as the name sounds. The persuasive is one that the persuasive element will be more represented in the speech. And then the digital presentation is, Amy Joy, why don't you define digital presentation?
So digital presentation in a lot of ways can be either an informative or a persuasive, but there is an added component where students are able to use a digital presentation, such as a PowerPoint or a Keynote, a Prezi or a Visme, and use those slides to then enhance the content of their speech. So that's a great question. That's a new category, and I do want to invite you. We do have additional sessions in the summit that are going to focus just on our new events. So we can talk about digital presentation just a little bit. I'll give you some insights and then invite you to come back to the session. Just like illustrated oratory, the goal of your slides is to enhance your presentation, not to just repeat it all in bullet point lists on a slide. So we're going to talk a lot about what that looks like and what are some of the best ways to do that. The face of digital presentation has changed a lot since 20 years ago when I taught PowerPoint in college. And we're going to talk about how we use images well, how we capture the essence of what we're saying and present it in a way that it's going to be memorable to the audience. So a lot of the purpose of a digital presentation is what images, what words, what thoughts can I put in my audience's mind so that when they leave, they're going to remember those things and recall the details of the speech. So we can talk more about that in our next session. So we do have a lot of questions about specific rules and specific event rules. I just want to remind you that we're going to defer those to the speech committee. 2 of our speech committee members are sitting on this call, so they eagerly anticipate your questions. But you can click on send an email to the speech committee from the website. So feel free at any time to ask those questions. They are looked at. Every single one of them is responded to. So we do encourage you to engage them in that way. We have a question here that says, what type of speech topics would you say connect best with the audience?
I personally think that the topic that connects best with you as the speaker usually is going to connect best with your audience, because they will sense your interest, your passion about the topic. And if you have a message to give that's relevant and important to you, most likely the Lord has laid that upon your heart. He's orchestrated the audiences that you are going to give your speech to. It's going to be meaningful and effective to them also.
That's great.
I once watched a speech that was very effective on the history of the potato. And you wouldn't think that would be a very interesting speech, but the person who was presenting it was very passionate, and it just brought that to life, and they did a wonderful job. And now we know the history of the potato, something
Fantastic.
I didn't know before.
Yeah.
And I would recommend, if you're looking for an additional resource, so maybe you're a more experienced student and you want to refine that skill of connecting with your audience, I recently read the book Communicating for Change by Andy Stanley, and he talks about the idea of making sure that your message has a point, it has a purpose. And so how do you do that? It seems really simple, but how do you take a topic that's important to you and then draw applications for your audience and for yourself as well? So I would recommend that if you're wanting to dive into that topic a little bit more.
The next question says, how does the NCFCA board decide which speech categories to have each season? So I'm going to shed just a little bit of light on that. The speech categories are first discussed by our speech committee. So as we have two folks on the speech committee on this call, ladies, can you just tell us how those conversations start? When do they start? Do the competitors have any influence over that? And if so, how would they make their wishes known to the speech committee?
We do receive input from people throughout the year. Not only do we get questions at our speech committee email, but we have people giving us suggestions. And as Amy Joy already said, that all of the emails are read and they're answered, and we put those ideas aside, and there's a lot of prayer and discussion about what events will take place the following year. I actually think that the process is good. There's a multitude of people that have input in the league, the leadership, and also we're listening to students and we're listening to our affiliate families. And so.
Great. Any other thoughts there, Sharon?
Yeah, I would just reiterate that. Just know that any thoughts you have, we are hearing them. And that's another thing I love about the NCFCA is that the affiliates, it's important. We want to hear from you, and we take all of that in serious plan.
That's great. And just a little bit of vision here too. Keep in mind that one of the goals of the league is to produce students who can communicate in a variety of settings. So one of the pieces that we do consider is what are the skills that each speech category is presenting, and we want to offer opportunities to develop those different skills. So we do look at a lot of different pieces for that. For example, I will give you one that was a huge topic of conversation last year. Can we have both ADS and humorous? So let's just talk about that for a second. What are the skills that are developed by each speech? Well, at the bottom of that, really the goal is how do we use humor well to enhance a message? And so for this year, the league chose to have humorous interpretation to give that opportunity for students to kind of investigate humor. So those speeches do rotate. They are considered every single year, but we're trying to balance the playing field to say, what are ways that we can have the most possible skills developed? And that is the essence of why we are having digital presentation this year. Because for a lot of you students who are going to go on to college, you're going to have the opportunity to give these presentations in college and beyond. My husband works for a corporate environment, and he has to give presentations. He has to give digital presentations. So to equip you with those skills before you go into those environments, that's one of our goals. So I also want to just dive into, we talked about in limited preparation speeches. Can you kind of shed a little bit of light on the difference between the three? And if I'm a brand new competitor, which one would you recommend?
Apologetics.
Okay, and why would you recommend apologetics?
I would recommend that for someone that even wasn't in speech and debate. It's something in our home we studied. We studied the Bible, and we study why we believe what we believe. And it's so important as a young person to have a grasp on that and to know for yourself, why do I believe what I believe? And understand how to communicate that to somebody, to give a reason for the hope that is in you.
Great.
So I would just briefly mention, the other two categories for limited preparation are extemp, where students are addressing current event issues, and then impromptu, where you're selecting a variety of topics, maybe words, quotes, phrases, and then you are choosing one and presenting a speech with a cohesive theme for that topic. And so in terms of deciding which one, I think that's such a unique and personalized question. So you think about the mission of the league, right? It's to equip students to think critically and communicate effectively, addressing life issues from a biblical worldview. So I think that's a conversation that parents and students can have together, along with coaches and club leaders, of where are you at as a student and what skills are next on the list for you to begin exercising and acquiring. So I can just tell you a little bit of my personal story, and that's not the prescription for every student, but just to shed light on how I walked through that process. When I first began, I told you I didn't have a lot of confidence. The idea of just impromptu terrified me, but that was a really great starting point to build that repertoire of stories and to learn how to connect different, maybe seemingly disjointed ideas around a common theme. So I think that's a great starting point for critical thinking. Apologetics is another event that I did start out with. And part of that was because my parents and my club was very involved in that process of, it's good to have you back, Sharon. Yeah. That process of digging into why do you believe what you believe. So my caution with apologetics would be to not just add it onto the checklist of, oh, I'm going to have another event, but to really incorporate it into who you are as a person. So for me, it was part of devotions in the morning, right? Thinking through the different questions and how does this relate to what I'm reading? It was part of conversation with friends and with family members and people I looked up to. It was a lot of deeper reading to dig into those topics and to wrestle through them. So maybe that is something that students are ready to do. Maybe it's something that students need, an older mentor or a parent to walk through the process with them. And then extemp for me, when was I ready to compete in that? Personally, it wasn't when I was just trying to remember to breathe and smile and not pass out, right? So I started extemp a couple of years into the NCFCA journey because you are doing a lot of research, you're staying up to date on current events, you're learning about politics and history and geopolitical implications. And so maybe that's a great thing for an older student to tackle or someone who's really interested in current events. So the bottom line, I would say parents, students, have those conversations, really think about the skills that you're going to be building. And in the context of NCFCA's mission of preparing you to address life issues, what's the best lineup for you to add to your curriculum this year?
That's great. I love that. I was thinking about too, sometimes kids are not wanting to do limited prep and they kind of need that gentle nudge to say, hey, just give it a try. Because sometimes you will find that your students actually come alive when they're given the freedom to speak whatever God puts into their heart and mind to share in that moment. And so that was the case for one of my children. That ended up being one of his favorite speech categories of all. And he wasn't so sure in the beginning that he even wanted to try it. So the other thing I would encourage with limited preps is to have grace for yourself. And what I mean by this is it's very rare that a brand new impromptu student walks in and gives a 4:59 speech, 4 minutes and 59 seconds speech. So, set goals for yourself. Today, I'm going to give a 30-second speech, and we're going to be super happy if we do that. And as you do that over time, you do start to develop those skills to add more stories, to think about other ways to present that information. So I want to ask you, Natalia, I know that you were very involved in our speech curriculum. So we have a question here that is about what resources are available to families so that they can grow in speech communication skills. Can you speak to that?
Yes, so this online summit is one of our great opportunities to give you that starting point for the season so that you can launch successfully. So we do have NCFCA's Comprehensive Guide to Speech, and that covers limited prep, platform, interpretation, and then we also release kind of an updated supplement online that goes along with that. So I saw there was a question asking about that supplement, and the answer is yes, the supplement will be available, and we are using the summit even as an opportunity to springboard some of that information.
That's great. Fantastic. So if you were going to share any last words of wisdom with our audience, what would you say about speech?
I would say it's so important. I mean, we see God using words throughout the entire Bible. He spoke the world into order through the words of his mouth. And if we look in Revelation, words once again come into play. Jesus is called the living word. So intentionality in the way that we use our words, in the speeches that you're going to be preparing, and even your thoughts and the stories for your limited preparation speeches as well. But I love speech. I'm excited for all of you new families. I was at a camp in Washington, well, actually in Idaho, a couple of weeks ago, and 60 kids, and most of them were brand new. So I know a lot of you are just starting, and I know you're going to have a great year. I'll be really excited to see a lot of you, and I'm praying for you.
And
Natalia, last thought?
Yes, my last thought would be, I'm going to start with a quote that I've been thinking about today by Eric Liddell. So he was the Olympic gold medalist, and he was a runner, and he said, "I believe God made me for a purpose, but he also made me fast, and when I run, I feel his pleasure." And so I know from a personal perspective and then coach perspective, that is what I love most about speech and debate, is that it provides such a variety of options, right? You have limited prep, you have platform, you have interp, you have the debate categories. So there are all these avenues for students to really step into where is that place where they can feel God's pleasure, where they go, wow, this is what I love. This is what he has made me to do. There's a calling here. And so maybe that's with telling stories. Maybe it's with writing stories. Maybe it's with taking very complex situations and distilling them down into a simple process that other people can follow. Whatever that skill is, I think NCFCA provides such a perfect arena for students to have that very safe place to test out a variety of different skills and to really step into that calling and purpose that God has for their life. So students, I encourage you this year, be thinking about that. What is God preparing you for? What is he doing in your heart? And maybe take some time to reflect on those questions and to write it down, because I promise you, when you look back years down the road, that is going to be a blessing for you. I know it's been a blessing for me to look back and see those threads that God has been weaving throughout my life, throughout, from middle school, high school, and into where I am right now.
I do want to remind you that we have speech sessions all week long at 2 o'clock. So stop back and we're going to dive in a little bit deeper each day to look at specific speech categories. As we close, I would love for each of you to take a moment and just type one takeaway thought that you have from this session. Put that in the chat box. We would love to see those. My takeaway is that practicing speech helps us prepare us so that we can make the most of every opportunity that God gives to us. So it reminds me of 1 Peter 3:15 says, but in your hearts, honor Christ the Lord as holy, always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you, yet do it with gentleness and respect. And the more we practice these communication skills, the more we'll be ready when we're given those opportunities. So thank you so much to our speakers. I know Sharon had some technical difficulties, but we're so grateful for her being here as well. Thank you to our Summit 2019 production manager, Mrs. Natalia Rosa, and to our gracious host, the University of Northwestern at St. Paul. And to our listening audience, thank you for joining us. For additional Summit session times, please visit www.ncfca.org/2019-online-summit. And until we see you again, keep building a firm foundation for speech. Have a great day.